Let's maybe start with Bhupinder. Can you maybe set the stage for us in this southern context? What are the general management practices that are kind of key indicators of healthy soil in your area?
So thank you for me being on the panel, and I appreciate that. As you know, the soils in the southern states are more heterogeneous. And so you can see a lot of diversity in the soils, even by looking around within 30, 40 feet. So the soil health context is a bit more challenging in our area than probably in the Midwest or the other regions. So for our sake, we do have very sandy texture soils and very low organic matter. When we are talking about the low organic matter, then it is less than 1%. And so it is very difficult for us, if people are not managing their farms, to make their soils healthy and make them more resilient to the biotic and abiotic stresses. So I joined Clemson back in 2017, and I had no idea about the soil health, but we didn't have much folks here. So being an NPK specialist, I jumped into that arena, and I am learning soil health on the go about the cover crop, what are the different indices we should use the soil health. And what I learned over time is that farmers are ahead of us already, even in the southern climate, and they are trying different kind of the cover crop mixtures. They are trying different the cropping rotations, and you have to be mindful also. In the southern area, we do have multiple crops, not only corn and beans. We do have the cotton and peanut and several other horticulture crops. So it is more challenging for folks to include cover crop into their rotations. And my focus in the past has been to include cover crop into the cotton and peanut based rotation. So think about that. If somebody is harvesting cotton back in November or December, or peanut back during that time, and they have very little time to incorporate cover crop into their rotations. So they have almost from December until April or May time to get benefit of the cover crop. So over time, I have been focusing more on to not only the cover crop, but also reduce the frequency of the tillage, which is a critical component for us, because soils in our area, we have a shallow clay pan. We do get very heavy compacted clay layers at 10 to 12 inches. And most of the folks who are into the conservation practices, they go from, they don't do heavy tillage, but they do the subsurface tillage just to break the clay pan. So the roots do have the access. So we are trying to help them understand that how we can, rather doing the subsoil tillage every years, maybe we can do every other years or once every 3 years. So the issues are quite different, and there are multiple issues in improving soil health in our region. So that is just in a nutshell what we are seeing in our area. And I'll be happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, thank you, Bhupinder, and we'll come back to you because there's a lot more to dig into there about what is working. But I want to get to Sarah, because Sarah, I think you probably have some of the same challenges down in the southern part of Florida, in that you're really dealing with some specialty crops. I understand you've got some sandy soil, and it may be a little bit different. So I'm curious, how do you help farmers in that area build soil health and organic matter?
Yeah, thank you. We do have similar challenges, like Bhupinder just mentioned, that our soils have, in some cases, less than 1% organic matter. And so some of that is just inherent in the parts of South Florida that we're at. And we also primarily don't have the traditional row crops that other folks are often thinking about in agriculture. We have primarily horticulture crops, tomatoes, bell peppers, things like that, and of course, Florida citrus. And so how do you try and incorporate some of these soil health practices into a tree crop where we cannot pull the trees up each year? And so we've been doing a lot of stuff trying to figure out how do we optimize and incorporate cover crops into the row middles of citrus groves and citrus orchards, which again is not a new practice. I've got pictures from the turn of the century where this used to be a more common thing, but for a variety of reasons, we've gotten away from it. And so how do we figure out ways to optimize these practices to build soil health in a system where we have these limited timeframes? The other thing we have to keep in mind here too is, for our vegetable production here in the South, our fallow season is actually during the summer season. Basically, vegetables are grown here from about beginning of September to the end of May. And so during, from May to about August is the fallow period. It's also our rainy season. And so we have a lot of challenges on figuring out what are the things that we could put into the soil that would still grow as cover crops during this incredibly rainy and short season. So there are a lot of things that we're thinking about and how to work and incorporate these ideas. But there's also a lot of interest. And so a lot of growers that I'm working with are already incorporating cover crops and some of these other practices and are looking at ways to try and innovate and figure out how do we optimize them to really make them work for our system where we have high decomposition because of our high temperatures and high moisture in these different seasons and different management practices that we have to deal with.
Wow, so we're talking row crops, we're talking citrus, we're talking vegetables, all these systems that are really probably intensively managed. And Tim, is there another system in the South that we're missing that you'd like to add to the mix?
Yeah, mainly we're in the northern part of the South, up in the Great Plains in Kansas here, and a lot of row crops. I think that like in some of the other regions, the primary approach to achieving better soil health with the growers here is in conservation or no-till, with the incorporation of mixtures of cover crops. For sure, there are still farmers who have mixed operations and maintain intact perennial grasslands, both natural and planted. And that certainly improves soil health in those regions, as well as rotations with perennial forages such as alfalfa. I think some of the exciting work that is being talked about a lot and adopted in some places is in the greater incorporation of perennials on the landscape. There's both perennial strips, prairie strips, that can be on the margin of fields where there's an erosion hazard or along streams or drainages. There's in Missouri, they're advocating alley cropping with woody species or more hedgerows to build soil in the vicinity of those, as well as to prevent erosion. And I might add that preventing erosion is really the first step towards achieving better soil health. We got to have more formation than we do loss, or the soil is not healthy. And a couple of other approaches, a really exciting one that further north, not in the South, but up in Iowa, they're working quite a bit with perennial ground covers, sowing annual crops into those ground covers, such as Cura clover, a nitrogen fixing legume. And that's a pretty exciting approach to mix a perennial and an annual. And then the work that we're doing here at the Land Institute is very far reaching in terms of developing perennial grain crops, wheat, sorghum, and new species like Kernza and Silphium and sainfoin. All of these perennials are achieving greater carbon input into the soil and protecting the formation of soil aggregates and enhancing some of those properties. Be happy to talk about that more.
Great. Well, thank you for adding that. I think the diversity in these systems is already showing me that grouping all of you into the South is really a challenge. So I suppose, Tim, maybe you have a follow-up for...
Yeah, I'd love to ask, Tim, if I could ask you about kind of the economics of incorporating perennials. I love the idea of bringing more perennials into kind of our agricultural systems, whether that be in the South or elsewhere. But are economics still a challenge there, or do you see some more economical ways to incorporate perennials where maybe some farmers haven't in the past?
It's a really good question. I think that they're under adopted for sure. And it's hard to say whether it's economic limitations or just the pace of changing a farming system so that you do allocate a certain part of land to prairie strips, for example, or inserting agroforestry into one's landscape. I don't doubt for a second that incentives would probably help, getting back to what Wayne was talking about at the very beginning, because we have known about a number of these approaches for some time, and you don't see them nearly as much as one would think, given the benefits that have been shown. And so I don't know what other panelists would say, but I don't doubt that the economics are a limiting factor, but I don't think it's the only limiting factor. Some of these approaches are really just being advocated now, like the perennial ground covers. They're still in their kind of infancy in working out the agronomy and some of the other aspects of incorporating them.
Okay, so let's go back to Bhupinder. I think, we talked a lot about the municipal waste, the benefits of adding organic matter to the soil, but, where does precision agriculture fit into this, or fertility management? And that's some of the things that you work with. Do those fit into the concept of soil health, or is there a way that they can fit in there if they don't already?
I think, Bhupinder, you might be on mute.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, that is quite interesting because, being in the area where the soils are so heterogeneous, we are trying to promoting the message of applying the input more precisely, so make people more profitable. And we have noticed also, being so heterogeneous soils, it may have an impact on how we grow the cover crops also. So within the same field also, so you have a area where you can have high yielding environment and a low yielding environment, and you can see the impact. Where you have the high yielding environment, you will have a better soil cover, and compared to the area where you do not have a high infiltration rate, you are struggling in the cash crop, and you will see the same challenges with the cover crops also. So what we are trying to do over time, that to learn, should we have the more seeds per acre for the cover crop in that area, how we can improve and create the bias within the field to reduce the within field variability. And there are so many things we do need to still explore about it. I don't think we have the answer yet, but we are trying a couple of those things.
I have a question, and Bhupinder, you may want to weigh in on this too, but maybe we'll start with Sarah with this question, which is, in the environment that you described earlier, which is 1% or less organic matter, very sandy soils, how do you measure progress? Like, are we doing better when it comes to soil health? What are the metrics you look to for that, and how does that start to show up for a farmer who may be skeptical at first about the practices, but starts to buy in when they see whatever that metric is?
That's a great question, and that's something that we're really trying to focus on here in some of our research too. And I guess I wanted to mention something that Joe mentioned in the panel before here about, we often think of soil organic matter as sort of this keystone indicator, and that's certainly, when we're talking to growers down here, something that they're very interested in when we talk about soil health because of our already low organic matter. But I think what we're finding here, and probably not too surprising either, is that it's important to look at this as a whole system. And so on some of these practices, we have seen changes in soil organic matter. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And I think some of that has to do with, again, this idea of what are these things that we need to be measuring. For our high rate of decomposition and our fast cycling here, maybe looking at things like POX-C and these other forms of carbon might be more accurate. Are there other things that we could look at with microbial communities, which is my specialty? Are there other things that we can look at with different components of that soil function, and looking at it as a whole system to see if we're seeing progresses with some of these methods? And so we have a couple of projects that we've started down here where we are trying to actually quantify some of these things and figure out what are the ways that are most appropriate for these sandy, low organic matter soils in this subtropical region to really address that. Because that is definitely something that the growers are very interested in, and trying to figure out, whether how long do they have to wait before they see benefits. So.
Right. And Bhupinder, anything to add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, it is, I think, a key question. So I do have 70% extension appointment. So I'm keep getting these questions. What are the parameters we should measure, when we should take the soil samples, and how often we should take it? And my question is always, you have to first understand what do you want to measure, and what is your basis. Means we can send the sample for 500 different things and you will have 500 different numbers, but does it mean anything to you or not? So in my opinions, we are trying to focus on certain parameters that mean something, and we can compare relative to the field across the road, or maybe 2 or 5 years down the lane. So I have been working with Dr. Ellen Franz-Luber over past few years. So we have been focused more on to measuring the biological fraction of the carbon, which has been, I think, a huge improvement over the years. So when you think about, most of our testing has been only on the chemical basis, but there has been a big jump how to do the different active fraction of the carbon. And many people do it differently. So they have their own reasons that why they want to stick into that one. But looking at Dr. Allen's research over past 10 years, we can say that soil test biological activity or measuring the particulate organic carbon, they are quite stable pools, and they are not going to change if you will take sample today versus tomorrow versus now or a month later or morning or evening. So that means something, and that you can relate back in time and can see how those numbers improve over time. So that is in terms of the carbon, but also in terms of the soil functions also. So we have been doing two different things. One is to measure the penetration resistance. As I mentioned that we do have quite a bit clay pan, shallow clay pan. So if we do not have the remedies for that one, it can impact the cash crop. So we are taking the pentrologger readings in the real time, so you can see the profile from 80 or 100 centimeters and can track it over time, that what happens when you reduce the frequency of tillage from 1 versus 3 years. Are you going to see any more penetration? Same with the cover crop also, because there are some species that has been promoted to alleviate the soil compaction. So that can be a direct measures also, and very easy to do. We have a campaign going on with our extension staff that how we can help farmers understand the compaction and whether what they are doing has been alleviating the compaction issue or not. And third is, which is more from the research standpoint of view on all or on-farm demonstration, we are trying to measure the infiltration rate. Because if we are able to improve the infiltration rate, we are directly improving the nutrient use efficiency. So these are the three key parameters we are trying to understand, not only from our sake in research, but help farmers understand some of those things they can do on their own too.
Great. Thank you. Well, we are again at the end of the time with this panel, and we're already wishing we had more time. So let's, with the last couple minutes or last minute, let's go through the panel. Is there anything we missed, which I know there's a lot, but are there things we missed that you'd like to make sure we mention? And Sarah, we'll come back to you to start.
I think, again, just this really focusing on that this is a holistic system. And so trying to think about all of the different components that are working together. And so even though sometimes we might not see massive changes in one parameter, we see changes in a different parameter. And how does that interact with this idea of improving the soil functions? And so we might see changes, or might not see as drastic changes in soil carbon, but we're seeing big changes in some of that microbial community. And how is that potentially going to impact, in our case, with agricultural soil, is the crop production. And so trying to look at all of those pieces together, I think, is really important.
Great, thank you. And Bhupinder, is there anything you want to leave us with as far as a final thought?
Yes, I think there is one very interesting point I want to bring into the attention is that you asked Tim earlier, that how to go over the economics. And that has been a challenge when you have the $30 to $40 per acre cost involved in the cover crop, how farmers can get anything out of it in the short run or in the long run. So what we have been trying over past 4 or 5 years is to plant cover crop and the plant cash crop into the greens, so we can let it seed for the first or the second years. And we have seen that there has been quite a bit volunteer growth up to third year. So what I am telling people, that if you will let it seed for a first or second year, you might see a dip in the yield for the cash crop, but it will reduce the cost of the cover crop seeding in the subsequent years. So I think that is going to be an eye-opening for us when we are going to promote this message, how to make the cover crop, increase the adoption of the cover crop in the coming years, especially when they don't have the time to implement cover crop in such a tight rotation.
Okay, thank you, Bhupinder. And Tim, is there anything briefly that you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to advocate for the use of natural systems of grasslands or forests to offer useful benchmarks for the metric for soil health. These systems are what agriculture was typically converted from, and they embody the 4 soil health principles that NRCS and Soil Health Institute have defined, which is continuous living roots, minimizing disturbance, maximizing soil cover, and maximizing biodiversity. And so it can be very useful for understanding the potential of one's soil, particularly with carbon, but for all sorts of other attributes as well. It's not the only one, but a very useful one.